Now, that is more than likely the case, and that if it was part of folk wisdom, received truth, that had been in humanity for centuries, then it became very useful to put those words into the mouth of Jesus. And in fact, you know, that those parallels can be found and can be mapped out.
Yeah.
You know, and therefore that should make anybody question, you know, why would the Saviour of the world use precisely the same words used by some other person, usually either a mythical character themselves or a figure who may have existed in history, such as Apollonius of Tyana, somebody else who's used those words. They are used by Jesus. You know, it pushes the possibilities too far. And I don't actually think Jesus does say too many terribly profound things. He often gets a free ride with that idea, as if he came out with so many wonderful ideas, but so did the Greek philosophers, and I think they spoke those words far more eloquently than Jesus did. But, you know, such is the reverence around this character that it's as if everything he says is profound.
So not just the things that he said, the things that he supposedly did. A lot of those are symbolic of other things, aren't they?
Well, they are symbolic. You know, take, for example, the classic turning water into wine.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was a trick done by Dionysus, the god of wine. The priests of Dionysus had special jugs where they could pour water in and pour wine out. You know, obviously a little magical trick that would impress the locals. You know, so the idea that Jesus became also it turns water into wine. I mean, Jesus becomes this composite character. You know, Apollo and Adonis looked after sheep, so Jesus is the shepherd like them. You know, Jesus has the characteristics of gods from throughout the whole West Asia. He has their characteristics. He becomes the composite figure. One of the most exciting areas we are actually finding now is that within the Buddhist texts, we can actually find word for word, supposedly, the statements of Jesus. These are texts that are centuries older, and they're saying exactly the same gems of wisdom that come from the mouth of Jesus. So I think, although the power of the church is immense and the forces that support it will no doubt rumble on for centuries, they are fighting a rearguard action. You know, there is evidence now accumulating, and the internet makes it that much more accessible, that the story is nothing more than a grand synthesis from that world culture at the time. And of course it became very useful for the late Roman Empire to adopt it as an officially approved doctrine, and then it began to erase those elements that it couldn't integrate, and it began to destroy any contradictory records, and so we had only the official story. Now, that is the sad truth. Now, I feel it a bit of waste of human energy that people try and sort of nowadays spend more time rewriting parts of the classic story. They leave most of it in place, but they have little adventures for Jesus. He goes to France and, you know, starts the French royal family or something, or he goes off to China, or he goes
India. That's another one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he goes all over the world, doesn't he?
Yeah.
You know, they rewrite part of the story to make it more acceptable.
Is that because it's so easy to do so? Because it's so open to interpretation?
It is extremely easy to do so. You know, the gospel character of Jesus, despite what we might imagine, is actually very thinly drawn. Very thinly drawn. I always remember that quotation I can give you from the actor Robert Powell when he starred as Jesus, and he was interviewed one day for the role in the film. You know, he said he went through the gospel with a fine-tooth comb to find out just what sort of character Jesus was, because he wanted to play him really well. And he said, I came up with nothing, nothing at all. Now, you know, that was an actor who wanted to play him for all he was worth. The fact is, the gospel Jesus is an automaton. He enters a scene, he pronounces some statement, the crowd are aghast or amazed, and he leaves. It's a sort of mechanical process of arrival, some strange or a wonderful statement, applause, and off he goes again. Now, it's very easy to embellish that. Very easy to make a story that suits your own requirements. And that's why Jesus has been so malleable over the centuries. He was quite easily morphed into a crusader knight when it was necessary to have a warrior Jesus.
Do you think that there has been any groups over time since the period of rewriting that have known this?
Any groups that have known this? I think that people have questioned the story from a very early stage. After all, I don't think the pagan philosophers, when they were forced to take notice of Christianity, actually were fooled by it for one moment. You know, Celsus, the philosopher, accused the Christians of simply counterfeiting earlier stories and doing it in less elegant style. But of course, those voices were silenced. Those voices were silenced, and once the church was so dominant and controlled the whole of what passed for education, there was little scope for really questioning the
So
story.
you're basically saying then that very early on, the Catholic Church or the Roman Church took this idea, this Jewish concept that had been laid down in texts, and thought, what a good idea to adapt this and change this to encapsulate many other pagan religions in order to foster the growth of our empire.
Indeed, that is part of the process. You had, as I think most scholars have woken up to the fact now, early Christianity was not a monotheism. It was, sorry, not a single school of thought. There were multiple Christianities contending. Now, if you like, the most respectable end simply saw Jesus as a way of explaining God's interface with humanity. God obviously couldn't enter matter. He was pure and couldn't be made base by becoming human. Therefore, he had to have emanations of himself that communicated with the world. And so they had an interpretation of the divine essence or the logos moving across the world. But the idea was perhaps far too esoteric for a mass audience. Therefore, it had to become an allegory. You had to give it a human form. I mean, it's rather interesting that, the word Christos is rather similar to Christos, the one being good, the other being Christian. So we can see how the idea of goodness becomes personified, and the idea of personifying virtues was very well established in the ancient world.
Well, one of the problems for me with the whole concept that they've created, the literalism that you're talking about, that he did actually walk on water, he did actually turn water into wine, is that we have to bend our minds to non-natural things. We have to suddenly see a paranormal world where these things are possible. It's kind of dragged people away from true nature.
Yes, and of course, that sort of story has a superficial appeal.
Well, of course it
how
does,
wonderful,
But we also then don't see the truth behind those stories.
Well, no, I mean, you could argue, and I think it would be argued by many people who saw the Gnostics as far more honourable people than the literalists that followed them. That
it's a whole new story in itself, isn't it? Because they believed in many gods and many kinds of Gnostics.
The truth got lost in the allegory, and then the allegory started to be understood literally. And then it was simply, oh, he worked tricks. This idea of a divine wisdom, a piece of guidance, gets lost in the idea, oh, it's just a trick.
Absolutely. Well, it's fascinating talking to you. It's just never long enough. We could do Gardiner's World shows for about 5 hours long, I think, and still not complete it. So the book is actually available worldwide, I take it, Amazon and all those others?
It's on Amazon, Amazon.com seem to have a problem. Amazon.co.uk seem to be more cooperative.
Amazon for you. Well, make sure that there are links on Gardiner's World website for you. So if anybody wants to get hold of Jesus Never Existed, and then nip down to the local church and have a word with the vicar and pastor and have a few 5 minutes, or if you want some ammunition for when the next time the Jehovah's Witnesses knock on the door, then I think this would be a superb book in the library to do for that. Thank you very much for coming on the show.